The pristine white BMW sat buried to its chrome door handles in wet concrete, its hazard lights blinking like a dying heartbeat. Karen Morrison stood frozen in her designer heels, mascara streaming down her cheeks as she watched 20 years of bitter neighborhood warfare culminate in the most expensive mistake of her life. The cement truck's engine still rumbled behind her, and Marcus Chen's voice cut through the autumn air like a blade. "I warned you 3 times, Karen. You should have listened." What started as a simple driveway dispute had spiraled into something far more dangerous, and Karen was about to discover that some battles have consequences that last forever. The first warning came on a Tuesday morning in October, delivered with the kind of quiet intensity that should have made Karen Morrison's blood run cold. Instead, she rolled her eyes and adjusted her grip on her coffee mug, the one with the world's best realtor emblazoned in gold lettering. "Mrs. Morrison," Marcus Chen said, standing at the property line between their adjacent lots on Elm Street, "I'm starting construction on my driveway extension tomorrow. I need you to keep your vehicles off my property." Karen glanced at her pristine white BMW X5 parked exactly where it had been for the past 3 months, 6 inches over the surveyed boundary line, its rear bumper kissing the edge of Marcus's gravel. The morning sun caught the car's metallic paint, making it gleam like a pearl against the backdrop of autumn leaves. "Your property?" Karen's laugh was sharp enough to cut glass. "That's rich, Marcus. I've been parking there since before you even moved in. Possession is 9/10 of the law." Marcus's jaw tightened. He was a man of measured words and careful actions, the kind of person who triple-checked property surveys and kept receipts for everything. At 45, he'd built a successful contracting business from nothing, and he understood the language of boundaries better than most. "Mrs. Morrison, I have the official survey right here." He held up a manila folder. "That strip of land you're parking on, it's mine. Has been since I bought this place 2 years ago." Karen's perfectly manicured fingers drummed against her mug. She'd been selling real estate in Millbrook for 15 years, long enough to know that possession often trumped paperwork in neighborhood disputes. Her BMW had been parking in that spot since her divorce 3 years ago, when she'd moved into the colonial next door and needed the extra space. "Survey or no survey, I'm not moving my car. Sue me." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Marcus folded the survey back into its folder, his movements deliberate and controlled. "This is your first warning, Mrs. Morrison. Please move your vehicle." "Warning?" Karen's voice rose an octave. "Who do you think you are, some kind of neighborhood sheriff? I'll park wherever I damn well please." Marcus turned to walk away, then paused. "You know, Mrs. Morrison, I've been nothing but neighborly since I moved in. I've overlooked your dog using my yard as a bathroom. I've said nothing about your dinner parties that go until 2 a.m. I've even helped you jumpstart that BMW twice when your battery died. And I never asked for your help," Karen shot back. "No, you didn't. But I gave it anyway, because that's what neighbors do." Marcus's voice carried a note of finality that should have been a warning in itself. "Move your car, Mrs. Morrison. You have until tomorrow morning." Karen watched him walk back to his house, a modest ranch that he'd been systematically renovating since moving in. Where her own property showed signs of genteel neglect, Marcus's showed the care of someone who understood that details mattered. Every board was straight, every paint line was clean, every fixture was perfectly aligned. She hated him for it. That evening, Karen hosted her monthly book club meeting, though the book was secondary to the wine and gossip. 5 women gathered in her living room, each carrying their own collection of neighborhood grievances and petty victories. "Can you believe the nerve?" Karen poured herself a 3rd glass of Chardonnay. "He's acting like he owns the place." "Well, technically," began Janet Powell, the librarian who actually read the books they were supposed to discuss. "Technically nothing." Karen's voice cut through the attempted interruption. "I've been parking there for 3 years. 3 years? That's adverse possession. Adverse possession requires 20 years in most states," Janet continued, but Karen wasn't listening. "He's probably just bitter because his wife left him," chimed in Melissa Torres, who lived 3 houses down and had never met Marcus but felt qualified to comment on his personal life. His wife didn't leave him, corrected Sarah Kim, who worked at the post office and knew everyone's business. She died. Cancer. That's why he moved here, fresh start after losing her. The revelation should have softened Karen's stance, but instead, it hardened her resolve. She'd been through her own losses, a marriage that ended in bitter divorce, a real estate career that peaked before the market crash, a daughter who called twice a year if she was lucky. She'd earned her parking spot through her own suffering. That's sad and all, but it doesn't give him the right to boss me around, Karen said, finishing her wine. My BMW stays exactly where it is. The next morning, Karen woke to the sound of heavy machinery. She stumbled to her kitchen window, still in her silk pajamas, and watched as a concrete truck positioned itself in Marcus's driveway. Two workers in hard hats were already preparing forms for the extension, their movements efficient and practiced. Marcus stood near the property line, holding a clipboard and wearing work boots that were already dusty with construction debris. When he saw Karen at her window, he raised his hand in what might have been a wave or might have been a final warning. Karen's response was to grab her car keys and stride outside in her pajamas and slippers. She climbed into her BMW and backed it precisely into its usual spot, making sure the rear bumper was exactly where it had been for months, 6 inches over the line, directly in the path of Marcus's planned driveway extension. Through her windshield, she watched Marcus approach. He moved with the careful gait of someone who'd spent decades managing difficult people and impossible situations. The construction workers watched with the detached interest of men who'd seen every type of property dispute imaginable. Mrs. Morrison. Marcus's voice was calm, professional. This is your second warning. Please move your vehicle so we can complete the driveway. Karen rolled down her window just enough to speak. I told you yesterday. I'm not moving. You want to build your driveway? Build it around my car. That's not how this works. Watch me. Karen turned off the engine and pocketed her keys. I'm going inside to get dressed. When I come back out, I expect you and your crew to be working around my BMW. She climbed out of the car, leaving it parked exactly where Marcus needed to pour concrete. The construction workers looked at their boss with expressions that said they'd seen this movie before, and it never ended well for the person blocking the work. Marcus watched Karen walk back to her house, her silk pajamas fluttering in the October breeze. He'd built a successful business by being patient, methodical, and fair. He'd survived his wife's death by learning to control what he could control and accept what he couldn't. But Karen Morrison was testing the limits of both his patience and his philosophy. Boss, called Tony, the crew chief. What do you want us to do? Marcus looked at the BMW, then at the concrete truck, then at his clipboard where he'd noted the exact dimensions of the driveway extension. Every measurement was precise, every angle calculated. He'd planned this project for months, obtaining permits, ordering materials, scheduling the crew. Give me 5 minutes, Marcus said. He walked to Karen's front door and knocked, 3 sharp raps that carried the weight of 20 years in construction. Where delays cost money and stubbornness could ruin projects. Karen answered in her robe, her hair wrapped in a towel. What now? Mrs. Morrison, I'm asking you one last time. Please move your car. And I'm telling you one last time, no. Marcus nodded slowly. Then I guess we'll have to work around it. Karen's smile was triumphant. Finally. Some common sense. But as Marcus walked back to his crew, something in his stride should have warned her. He wasn't walking like a man who'd been defeated. He was walking like a man who'd just made a decision that would change everything. Tony, Marcus called to his crew chief, how long do we have before that concrete starts to set? About 20 minutes once we start pouring, boss. Why? Marcus looked at the BMW one more time, calculating angles and consequences. Because we're going to pour exactly where the permits say we can pour. Every inch of it. But boss, the car is parked on private property without permission. That makes it abandoned property. Marcus's voice carried the authority of someone who'd spent decades dealing with legal complications. We're not responsible for obstacles left in our work area. Tony looked at the BMW, then at Marcus, then back at the BMW. In his 20 years of construction, he'd seen contractors bend over backward to accommodate difficult neighbors. He'd never seen one quite like this. "You sure about this, boss?" Marcus thought about his wife Sarah, who died in this very driveway 2 years ago when the ambulance couldn't get close enough to the house because of illegally parked cars. He thought about Karen's smug smile and her 3 warnings ignored. He thought about the property survey in his folder and the PE. The first drops of concrete hit the BMW's rear bumper at exactly 9:47 a.m. Karen was upstairs applying her foundation when she heard the sound, a wet, heavy splashing that seemed out of place on a crisp October morning. She paused, mascara wand halfway to her lashes, and listened. The sound continued, rhythmic and deliberate, like heavy rain on a tin roof. Downstairs, Marcus Chen watched the concrete flow from the truck's chute with the calm focus of a man who'd made his peace with consequences. The grey mixture cascaded in a perfect arc, filling the wooden forms he'd constructed with mathematical precision. Where the forms ended and Karen's BMW began, the concrete didn't stop, it simply found a new shape to fill. "Boss," Tony called over the rumble of the mixer, "you sure about this? Once we start, there's no going back." Marcus adjusted his hard hat and checked his watch. "Mrs. Morrison has had 18 hours to move her vehicle. That's more consideration than most people. Get." The concrete pulled around the BMW's rear tires, creeping up the sidewalls like grey quicksand. It was high-grade mix, designed to cure quickly and hold for decades. The kind of concrete that, once set, required jackhammers and considerable expense to remove. Upstairs, Karen finally identified the sound and rushed to her bedroom window. What she saw made her blood freeze in her veins. "What the hell?" She didn't finish the sentence. She was already running, her bathrobe flying behind her like a battle flag, her bare feet slapping against the hardwood stairs. She burst through her front door just as the concrete reached the BMW's door handles. The white paint was already disappearing beneath the grey tide, and the car's hazard lights blinked frantically as the electrical system registered the unprecedented situation. "Stop!" Karen's scream cut through the morning air like a fire alarm. "Stop right now." Marcus looked up from his clipboard, his expression mild. "Good morning, Mrs. Morrison. I did warn you. You can't do this. This is destruction of property." "Your property was illegally parked on my land," Marcus replied, his voice carrying the calm authority of someone who'd spent hours researching the legal implications of his actions. "I've documented everything. The surveys, the warnings, the permits. You were given multiple opportunities to comply." Karen splashed through the wet concrete in her slippers, the grey mixture seeping between her toes. "Turn off that truck. Turn it off right now." "Tony," Marcus called to his crew chief, "how much more do we need?" "About another 10 minutes. Boss. We are at about 60%. Karen grabbed Marcus's arm, her manicured nails digging into his work shirt. "You don't understand, I need that car. I have showings today, appointments, I have a life. You should have thought of that before you ignored 3 warnings. I'll sue you." Karen's voice cracked with desperation. "I'll sue you for everything. You have." Marcus gently removed her hand from his arm. "Mrs. Morrison, I suggest you call your insurance company. And your lawyer. In that order." The concrete had reached the BMW's windows now, creeping up the glass like a grey tsunami. Inside the car, Karen's iPhone was still plugged into the charger, her real estate files scattered across the passenger seat, her life suspended in automotive. "Amber. Please," Karen's voice dropped to a whisper. "Please, I'll move it. I'll never park here again. I'll pay you. Just please stop." Marcus paused, and for a moment, the construction noise seemed to fade. Tony watched his boss's face, recognizing the expression of a man weighing mercy against justice. "Mrs. Morrison," Marcus said finally, "do you know why I moved to this neighborhood?" Karen shook her head, tears streaming down her cheeks, mixing with the concrete dust in the air. "My wife died in our old driveway. Heart attack. The ambulance couldn't get close enough because of illegally parked cars. They had to carry her 200 yards to the truck." Marcus's voice remained steady, but something deeper flickered in his eyes. She might have lived if they'd gotten to her 30 seconds sooner. Karen's breath caught. I didn't know you didn't want to know. You wanted to win. Well, congratulations, Mrs. Morrison. You've won something you'll never forget. The concrete truck's engine downshifted and the flow from the chute slowed to a trickle. The BMW was now buried up to its roofline, only the antenna and part of the sunroof visible above the grey surface. The hazard lights had finally stopped blinking. Karen stood in the middle of what was now Marcus's extended driveway, her white BMW entombed beneath her feet like a luxury car in a bizarre archaeological site. The concrete was already beginning to set, its surface smoothing into an almost mirror-like finish. What have you done? She whispered. I've built a driveway, Marcus replied. Exactly according to the permits and surveys. If there's an obstacle in the way, that's not my problem. Neighbors had begun to gather. Mrs. Patterson from across the street stood on her porch in her housecoat, her mouth open in shock. The Johnsons from next door had come out to their front yard, their teenage son already filming everything on his phone. Call the police, Karen said, her voice gaining strength. Someone call the police right now. Already did, said Marcus, pulling out his phone. They should be here in about 10 minutes. I wanted to make sure everything was properly documented. Karen stared at him, and in that moment, she understood that she'd been playing checkers while Marcus had been playing chess. Every move had been calculated, every legal angle considered. He'd turned her stubbornness into a trap, and she'd walked into it with her eyes wide open. This is insane, she said, but her voice lacked conviction. This is construction, Marcus corrected. Tony, pack up the equipment. We are done here. As the crew began disassembling the concrete forms, Karen walked around the perimeter of her buried BMW, her slippers squelching in the wet concrete. The car's outline was still visible beneath the surface, like a prehistoric creature preserved in stone. How much? She asked suddenly. Excuse me. How much will it cost to get it out? Marcus considered the question with the same methodical approach he applied to all his projects. Well, you'd need to hire a concrete cutting crew. That's about $1,200. Then you'd need a crane to lift the car out, another $800. But the real problem is the concrete that's gotten into the engine, the transmission, the electronics. Karen's face went pale. What does that mean? It means your BMW is totaled. The insurance company will write it off as a total loss due to environmental damage. But that car cost me $60,000. Then you should have moved it when I asked. The sound of sirens cut through the morning air. 2 police cruisers and a fire truck turned onto Elm Street, their lights flashing red and blue against the autumn leaves. Karen looked at Marcus, then at the buried BMW, then at the approaching emergency vehicles. In her mind, she was already calculating the cost, not just the car, but the insurance deductible, the rental car, the legal fees, the humiliation of having to explain to clients why she couldn't drive them to showings. You've ruined me, she said. No, Mrs. Morrison. You've ruined yourself. I just provided the concrete. The first police officer approached, a young woman with the patient expression of someone who'd seen every possible neighborhood dispute. I'm Officer Martinez. We got a call about a property dispute. This maniac buried my car in concrete. Karen pointed at the BMW's faint outline in the grey surface. Officer Martinez looked at the scene, then at Marcus, then back at Karen. Sir, can you explain what happened here? Marcus handed her a folder thick with documents. Construction permits, property surveys, written warnings to Mrs. Morrison requesting she move her vehicle from my property. Everything's documented. As Officer Martinez reviewed the paperwork, Karen felt the ground shifting beneath her feet, not literally, but in every way that mattered. The concrete was hardening, her BMW was becoming a permanent fixture, and the reality of her situation was setting in like the cure of Portland cement. Officer Martinez said to Karen, were you aware that your vehicle was parked on Mr. Chen's property? I've been parking there for 3 years. That doesn't give you legal right to the property. Mr. Chen has valid permits for this construction project, and he documented multiple warnings asking you to move your vehicle. Karen looked around at the gathered neighbors, at the concrete truck pulling away, at the BMW's sunroof barely visible above the grey surface. The October morning that had started with her victory over Marcus Chen had become the most expensive mistake of her life. "So what happens now?" she asked. Officer Martinez closed the folder. "Well, Mr. Chen is within his rights to build on his own property. Your insurance company will handle the vehicle claim. Beyond that, this is a civil matter." As the police officers prepared to leave, Karen stood alone in the middle of Marcus's new driveway, her BMW beneath her feet like a $60,000 grave marker. The concrete was already hard enough to walk on, and she realized with growing horror that this wasn't temporary, this was permanent. Marcus was cleaning concrete residue from his boots when Karen approached him one final time. "I hope you're happy," she said. Marcus looked at her, and for the first time that morning, his expression softened slightly. "Mrs. Morrison, I'm not happy about this. But I'm not sorry either. You had choices. You made them. What am I supposed to do now?" "What everyone else does when they park illegally," Marcus replied. "You deal with the 3 days after the BMW became part of Marcus Chen's driveway, Karen Morrison discovered that humiliation had a compound interest rate. The video had gone viral. "Mom, what the hell is this?" Jessica Morrison's voice crackled through Karen's phone at 6:30 a.m., sharp with the kind of embarrassment only adult children could inflict. "My coworkers are sending me TikToks of you standing in concrete screaming at some construction guy." Karen sat at her kitchen table, staring at her laptop screen where the same video played on repeat. The footage, shot by the Johnson teenager from next door, had been titled "Karen Gets Owned by Concrete" and had accumulated 2.3 million views in 72 hours. The comments were brutal. "It's not what it looks like," Karen said, but even she didn't believe it anymore. "It looks like you parked your car on someone else's property and they buried it in cement. Please tell me that's not what happened." Karen closed the laptop. "It's complicated." "Complicated? Mom, you're a real estate agent. You know about property lines." "I've been parking there for 3 years, Jessica." 3 years? And apparently you've been wrong for 3 years. Jessica's sigh carried the weight of a daughter who'd spent a lifetime cleaning up her mother's messes. "How much is this going to cost?" Karen looked out her window at Marcus's driveway, where her BMW's outline was still visible beneath the smooth concrete surface. Over the past 3 days, she'd watched neighbors, joggers, and curious strangers stop to stare and take pictures. Some left flowers as if it were a roadside memorial. "The insurance adjuster is coming today," Karen said. "Insurance? Mom, please tell me you have good coverage." Karen had spent 2 sleepless nights reading her policy documents. The news wasn't good. Comprehensive covers flood, theft, vandalism. It doesn't cover owner stupidity or illegal parking, resulting in concrete entombment. Jesus, Mom. The car's worth $60,000. The insurance company says they'll cover fair market value minus the deductible, but they are calling it a total loss due to environmental damage. How much are you getting? $38,000. After the deductible. The silence stretched long enough for Karen to hear her daughter's coffee maker brewing in the background. Jessica lived in Portland now, in a trendy apartment with exposed brick walls and a fiancé who worked in tech. She'd escaped Millbrook and her mother's drama 8 years ago, and conversations like this reminded them both why. "Mom, you need to let this go. Take the insurance money, buy a used car, and move on. Let it go." Karen's voice rose. "That man destroyed my property. He humiliated me in front of the entire neighborhood. You humiliated yourself. You parked on his property and refused to move. Since when are you on his side?" "I'm on the side of sanity." "Mom, you're 52 years old. Act like it." After Jessica hung up, Karen sat in her kitchen and planned her revenge. She'd spent 3 days researching Marcus Chen, using every resource available to a real estate agent with too much time and too much anger. Property records, business licenses, contractor reviews, building permits. She'd compiled a file thick enough to choke a horse. Marcus Chen Contracting had been operating in the county for 12 years. 97% customer satisfaction rating. Better Business Bureau A+ rating. 0 complaints filed with the state licensing board. The man was apparently a saint with a nail gun. But Karen had found something. Marcus's driveway extension permit had been approved for 847 square feet. Karen had measured the finished product with a surveyor's will borrowed from her real estate office. The actual driveway measured 863 square feet, 16 square feet over the permitted amount. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Karen called the county building department at exactly 8 a.m. when they opened. Building inspections, this is Derek. Hi, Derek. This is Karen Morrison on Elm Street. I need to report a potential building code violation. What seems to be the problem? My neighbor built a driveway extension that exceeds his permitted square footage. I have measurements. Derek's keyboard clicked in the background. What's the address? 1247 Elm Street. The property owner is Marcus Chen. More clicking. I show that permit was closed out last week after final inspection. Everything checked out. Well, your inspector made a mistake. The driveway is 16 square feet over the permitted size. A pause. Are you the same Mrs. Morrison who had the vehicle embedded in the concrete? Karen's cheeks burned. How is that relevant? Just trying to understand this situation. We've had several calls about that incident. This is a separate issue. Are you going to send an inspector or not? I'll add it to the list. Someone will be out within 10 business days. Karen hung up and immediately called the city planning department, the environmental health office, and the fire marshal. By lunch, she'd filed 6 separate complaints against Marcus's driveway project. Then she got creative. That afternoon, Karen stood outside Marcus's house holding a clipboard and wearing her most professional blazer. When he answered the door, his expression shifted from surprise to wariness. Mrs. Morrison. What can I do for you? I'm here in my capacity as a licensed real estate agent, Karen said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. I've been retained by a client who's interested in purchasing your property. Marcus leaned against his doorframe. My property isn't for sale. Everything's for sale at the right price. My client is prepared to make a very generous offer. And who is this client? Karen smiled. Confidentiality agreements prevent me from disclosing that information. But I can tell you they are offering 15% above market value for a quick closing. It was a lie. Karen had no client. But she'd spent enough years in real estate to know that the right offer could flush out information about a property owner's financial situation, future plans, or personal vulnerabilities. Marcus studied her face. Mrs. Morrison, are you trying to force me to sell my house? I'm simply presenting a business opportunity. Because I buried your car in concrete. This has nothing to do with personal grievances. This is business. Marcus almost smiled. You know what, Mrs. Morrison? I admire your persistence. But I'm not selling. Not to your client, not to anyone. You might want to reconsider. Property values in this neighborhood are about to take a significant hit. Is that a threat? It's market analysis. Bad publicity affects property values. Viral videos especially. Karen gestured toward the street, where a small group of teenagers had gathered to take selfies with the buried BMW in the background. Controversy has a way of spreading. Marcus stepped outside, closing the door behind him. Mrs. Morrison, let me be very clear. I'm not intimidated by building inspectors, fake real estate offers, or viral videos. I did everything by the book. I have documentation for every decision I made. We'll see about that. Yes, we will. But while we are having this conversation, I should probably mention something. Karen's confidence wavered slightly. What? I've been in construction for 20 years. Do you know what contractors learn very quickly? I'm sure you're going to tell me. We learn to document everything. Every conversation, every decision, every warning. Marcus pulled out his phone. I've been recording this entire conversation, Mrs. Morrison. Just like I recorded our previous conversations. Karen's face went pale. You can't do that. Actually, I can. Single-party consent state. As long as one person in the conversation knows it's being recorded, it's perfectly legal. You've been recording me. Every interaction since our first conversation about the parking situation. Your threats, your refusal to move the vehicle, your admission that you knew you were parking on my property but didn't care. Marcus pocketed his phone. It's amazing how different these conversations sound when you play them back. Karen took a step backward. This isn't over. No, Mrs. Morrison, it's not. Because now you've escalated from a simple parking dispute to harassment. Filing false reports and attempting to interfere with my property rights. I've consulted with my attorney and he's advised me to document everything you do from this point forward. Your attorney? Rebecca Steinberg. You might know her, she handles a lot of real estate litigation in the county. She's very interested in your behavior pattern. Karen knew Rebecca Steinberg. Every real estate agent in the county knew Rebecca Steinberg. She was the lawyer you hired when you needed someone destroyed professionally and personally. She was also expensive, which meant Marcus was serious about fighting back. You're bluffing, Karen said, but her voice lacked conviction. Am I? Would you like to bet your real estate license on it? The words hit Karen like a physical blow. Her real estate license was more than her livelihood, it was her identity, her only remaining source of professional pride, the last thing connecting her to the successful woman she'd once been. You wouldn't dare. Mrs. Morrison, you filed 6 frivolous complaints against my property in one day. You've attempted to interfere with my business by making false claims about building violations. You've misrepresented yourself as having a client when you're clearly acting out of personal vendetta. Marcus's voice remained calm, but there was steel underneath. That's harassment. It's also potentially a violation of your real estate ethics code. Karen felt the ground shifting beneath her feet again, the same sensation she'd experienced when she'd watched her BMW disappear. Karen Morrison found Marcus Chen's weakness at 2:47 a.m. on a Tuesday, 3 weeks after her BMW became a concrete fossil. She was sitting in her darkened living room, surrounded by empty wine bottles and printouts from her obsessive research into Marcus's life, when she discovered the foreclosure notice buried in the county's online records. The document was dated 18 months ago, filed against the property at Marcus's previous address. Marcus Chen and Sarah Chen. Joint debt. Medical bills totaling $347,000. House lost to foreclosure 6 months after Sarah's death. Karen stared at the screen until her eyes burned. Marcus wasn't the financially secure contractor she'd assumed. He was a widower who'd lost everything to his wife's cancer treatment and had started over in Millbrook with whatever savings he had left. The meticulous renovations, the perfect property maintenance, the obsessive attention to detail, it wasn't prosperity, it was desperation. A man trying to rebuild his life one board at a time. And Karen had found exactly the weapon she needed to destroy him. The next morning, she called the bank that held Marcus's current mortgage. Millbrook First National Loan Department. Hi, this is Karen Morrison with Morrison Real Estate. I'm calling about a property at 1247 Elm Street. The owner is Marcus Chen. How can I help you? I'm working with a client who's interested in the property, but we've discovered some concerning information about Mr. Chen's financial history. Specifically, a recent foreclosure and significant medical debt. I can't discuss customer account information. Of course not. I'm simply reporting what appears to be fraudulent information on a loan application. Mr. Chen may have misrepresented his financial situation when he applied for his current mortgage. It was a lie wrapped in enough truth to sound credible. Karen had no evidence of fraud, but she knew that banks took such allegations seriously enough to trigger an internal review that could make Marcus's life very difficult. I'll transfer you to our fraud investigation department. Karen spent 20 minutes spinning a web of half-truths and implications, never making direct accusations but painting a picture of a man who might have deceived the bank about his ability to pay. She cited the foreclosure, mentioned mysterious cash payments for home renovations, and suggested that Marcus's contracting business might be less successful than it appeared. When she hung up, Karen felt a surge of satisfaction that lasted exactly until her phone rang. Mrs. Morrison. This is Rebecca Steinberg, Marcus Chen's attorney. Karen's blood turned to ice water. I don't know what you're talking about. Mrs. Morrison, let's not play games. You called my client's mortgage company this morning and made fraudulent reports about his financial situation. The bank recorded the call and forwarded it to us as a potential harassment case. You were simply committing what could be classified as attempted financial fraud, harassment, and possibly criminal defamation. The bank has already determined that your claims were baseless and malicious. Karen's hand tightened. On the phone. You can't prove anything. Actually, I can. The bank keeps recordings of all calls to their fraud line. Your voice is on tape making demonstrably false statements about my client. But that's not why I'm calling. Then why are you calling? Because I want to give you one chance to stop this before it destroys your life completely. Karen laughed, but it sounded hollow even to her. Destroys my life. He buried my car in concrete. Your car was illegally parked on his property after multiple warnings. What you're doing now is criminal harassment. There's a difference. I'm not harassing anyone. I'm investigating, Mrs. Morrison. In the past 3 weeks, you've filed 12 frivolous complaints with various city departments. You've called my client's bank with false fraud allegations. You've contacted 3 of his business clients claiming he's under investigation for building code violations. You've posted negative reviews of his business on 7 different websites. Using fake names. Karen's mouth went dry. She hadn't realized anyone was tracking her activities so comprehensively. That's business competition, she said weakly. That's harassment. And it stops now. Or what? Or I file a restraining order tomorrow morning. Along with criminal harassment charges, defamation claims, and a complaint with the State Real Estate Board. Karen felt the walls closing in. You can't, Mrs. Morrison. I've been practicing law for 22 years. I've never seen someone work so hard to destroy their own life over a parking dispute. Your real estate license is already under review because of the fraud call to the bank. 3 of your recent property listings have fallen through because buyers found the viral video and didn't want to work with you. Your reputation is in free fall, and you're about to lose the only income source you have left. The words hit Karen like physical blows. She'd been so focused on attacking Marcus that she hadn't noticed her own world crumbling. 3 lost sales in 2 weeks. Clients who suddenly had scheduling conflicts. Whispered conversations that stopped when she entered rooms. What do you want? Karen whispered. I want you to stop. Completely. No more complaints, no more false reports, no more harassment of any kind. In exchange, my client won't press charges. And if I don't agree, then you'll discover that Marcus Chen isn't the only one who documents everything. Rebecca Steinberg hung up, leaving Karen alone with the sound of her own heartbeat and the growing realization that she'd miscalculated catastrophically. That afternoon, Karen drove to Marcus's house. She found him in his backyard, installing a new garden bed where his wife's rose bushes had died the previous winter. He looked up when she approached but didn't stop working. Mrs. Morrison. I want to make a deal. Marcus set down his shovel and studied her face. Karen looked like she hadn't slept in days. Her usually perfect makeup was smudged, her hair was uncombed, and her clothes looked like she'd slept in them. What kind of deal? You drop the legal threats and I'll stop everything. Define everything. Karen's voice cracked slightly. The complaints. The calls. All of it. I'll leave you alone. Marcus walked to his patio and sat down heavily in a lawn chair. Mrs. Morrison, 3 weeks ago, this could have ended with a simple apology and a promise to park legally. Now you're facing criminal charges. Oh no. Karen sat down across from him without being invited. I know I went too far. Do you? Because I don't think you understand what you've done. Karen looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time since this began. He looked tired. Not just physically tired, but soul-deep exhausted, like a man who'd fought too many battles and was running out of strength for another one. I found out about your wife, she said quietly. About the foreclosure. The medical bills. Marcus's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. And you tried to use it against me. Yes. Why? It was such a simple question, but Karen couldn't find a simple answer. Why had she escalated a parking dispute into a campaign of destruction? Why had she risked everything she had left over 6 inches of gravel? Because I was angry, she said finally. About the car. About everything. The words came out in a rush, like water through a burst dam. My marriage. My career. My daughter who barely talks to me. The fact that you have your life together. And I'm falling apart. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. Mrs. Morrison, do I look like I have my life together? Karen glanced around his yard. The perfect landscaping, the pristine house, the careful attention to every detail. Yes. I lost my wife 2 years ago. I lost our house. I lost our savings. I moved here with a pickup truck and enough money for a down payment on this place. Marcus gestured toward his house. Everything you see is me trying to build something new from the wreckage of everything I loved. Then why did you have to take my parking spot? Because it wasn't your parking spot. It was my property. And after watching my wife die because an ambulance couldn't get close enough to help her, I don't compromise on access issues. Karen felt something inside her chest crack open. I didn't know. You didn't want to know. You wanted to be right. They sat in silence for several minutes, watching the October light fade across the yard. Finally, Karen spoke. What happens now? That depends on you. I can't undo what I've done. No, you can't. But you can stop making it worse. Karen nodded slowly. Will you really have me arrested? Marcus looked at her, really looked at her, and saw not the entitled neighbor who'd made his life miserable, but a broken woman who'd lost control of her own story. Mrs. Morrison, I don't want to destroy you. I just want to live in peace. Then what do you want from me? I want you to get help. Real help. Therapy, counseling, whatever it takes to figure out why you nearly threw your life away over a parking space. Karen's eyes filled with tears. And if I do that, then maybe we can find a way to be neighbors instead of enemies. As Karen walked back to her house, she realized that Marcus Chen had just offered her something she hadn't received in years, a second chance. The question was whether she was strong enough to take it. Behind her, Marcus returned to his garden, planting bulbs that would bloom in the spring. He'd learned that sometimes the only way forward was to plant something new and trust that it would grow, even in damaged soil. But forgiveness, he knew, was only the first step. The real test would come when Karen discovered WH. 6 months later, Karen Morrison stood in her empty house on a grey March morning, watching the moving truck pull away with the last of her possessions. The real estate market had not been kind to someone whose professional humiliation had achieved internet immortality. BMW Karen merchandise was still being sold on Etsy, and her Yelp reviews had become a tourist attraction for people who collected stories of spectacular public meltdowns. She'd managed to sell the house, but only after reducing the price twice and accepting an offer 15% below market value. The buyers were investors who planned to flip it. They'd mentioned that having a famous, previous owner might actually help their marketing. Karen carried the last box to her Honda Civic, a reliable, anonymous car that no one would ever mistake for a status symbol. The $38,000 insurance payout from her BMW, combined with the house sale, had given her enough money to start over somewhere else. She'd chosen a small town in Vermont where no one knew her story and real estate licenses transferred easily. As she loaded the box into her car, she heard footsteps on the gravel behind her. Moving day. Marcus Chen stood at the property line, holding a coffee mug and wearing the same calm expression he'd worn throughout their entire conflict. Finally, Karen said, "I bet you're relieved." "Actually, I'm going to miss you." Karen looked at him in surprise. "After everything I put you through. You taught me something important." "What's that?" "That forgiveness isn't something you give to other people. It's something you give to yourself." Karen set down the box and really looked at Marcus for the first time in months. He looked different, lighter somehow, as if some burden he'd been carrying had finally been set down. "I've been going to therapy," she said suddenly. "Like you suggested." "How's that going?" "Terrible. Turns out I have what Dr. Patterson calls chronic displacement of anger. Apparently, I've been mad at my ex-husband for 7 years, but it was easier to be mad at you." Marcus almost smiled. "And now?" "Now I'm learning that being angry all the time is exhausting." Karen picked up the box again. "I'm also learning that I was a terrible neighbor." "You were a neighbor in pain." "There's a difference." "Is there?" "Because I nearly destroyed both our lives over 6 inches of gravel." Marcus walked over to his driveway, where Karen's BMW outline was still visible beneath the concrete. Someone had placed a small memorial plaque next to it that read, "Here lies Karen's car, victim of poor parking choices 2024 to 2024. "You know what's funny?" Marcus said. "I was so angry about this whole thing that I almost missed the point." "Which was?" "That sometimes the universe puts broken people next to each other so they can help each other heal." Karen felt tears threatening. "I don't think I helped you heal, Marcus. I think I made everything worse. You forced me to fight. For something again. After Sarah died, I'd given up on caring about anything. Your car made me remember that some things are worth defending. Your property line. My right to build a life without asking permission from people who don't understand what I've lost." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the March wind scatter last year's leaves across both their yards. "What are you going to do in Vermont?" Marcus asked. "Start over. Sell houses to people who don't know about my YouTube fame. Maybe learn to park legally." "That would be a good start." Karen laughed, the first genuine laugh she'd had in months. "You know, I've been thinking about something Dr. Patterson said. She told me that the opposite of anger isn't forgiveness. It's curiosity." "What do you mean?" "I spent so much energy being angry at you that I never bothered to wonder why you cared so much about that stupid parking space. If I'd asked about your wife instead of fighting about property lines, maybe things would have been different." Marcus nodded slowly. "Maybe. But then again, maybe we both needed to go through this to get where we are now." "Where are we now?" "Neighbors who are saying goodbye properly." Karen extended her hand. "I'm sorry, Marcus. For all of it. I'm sorry about your wife, and I'm sorry about the harassment, and I'm sorry it took me so long to understand that you were just trying to protect something important to you." Marcus shook her hand. "I'm sorry too, Karen. I could have handled it differently. I could have explained about Sarah from the beginning instead of just giving you warnings." "Would I have listened?" "Probably not. You were pretty committed to being right." "I was committed to being miserable. Being right was just my excuse." They released hands and Karen felt something she hadn't experienced in years, the lightness that comes with genuinely letting go of a grudge. "Will you do me a favor?" she asked. "What's that?" "Will you send me a picture when you finish the garden? I'd like to see what grows there." "I'd like that." Karen climbed into her Honda Civic and started the engine. As she backed out of her driveway for the last time, she looked at Marcus's property, the perfect lawn, the careful landscaping, the driveway where her BMW rested in its concrete tomb. But instead of anger, she felt something unexpected, gratitude. Because Marcus Chen had done something no one else in her life had managed to do. He'd held up a mirror that forced her to see exactly who she'd become, and then he'd offered her a chance to become someone better. As she drove down Elm Street, Karen passed the neighbors who'd watched their war with the fascination of people observing a slow-motion car crash. Mrs. Patterson waved from her porch. The Johnson teenager, now famous for his viral video, gave her a thumbs up. Even the mailman nodded as she passed. For the first time in months, Karen didn't feel like she was running away. She felt like she was moving towards something, a life where parking spaces were just parking spaces, where neighbors were people to know instead of enemies to defeat, where she could be wrong about something without it destroying her world. 3 hours later, as she crossed the Vermont state line, Karen's phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Marcus, and it contained a single photo, a small green shoot emerging from the soil in his backyard garden, with the caption, "Spring always comes eventually." Karen pulled over at a rest stop and typed back, "Thank you for teaching me how to wait for it." She put her phone away and looked at the road ahead, empty, promising, leading toward a place where she could plant something new and tend it carefully until it grew. Behind her, in Millbrook, Marcus Chen was working in his garden, planting flowers around a concrete memorial to the day two broken people learned that sometimes the only way to heal is to break completely first. The BMW would remain there forever, a $60,000 reminder that some mistakes become monuments. But around it, life was already beginning to grow again, tentative, fragile, but stubbornly determined to bloom. And in Vermont, Karen Morrison was learning that the best view isn't always from behind the wheel of a luxury car. Sometimes it's from the passenger seat of your own life, watching the scenery change as you finally head in the right direction. The War of Elm Street was over. Both sides had lost everything they thought they were fighting for, and in losing it, they'd found something infinitely more valuable, the courage to build something better from the wreckage. After all, that's what neighbors do.